Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Data Show. My name is Chris Greco. I'm your host for the next 30 minutes. What we do in this program is we take a look at data. We take a look at where to get data, where to answer questions, because basically that's what data does. Data answers questions, or they try to not reject or reject hypotheses, or they attempt to maybe associate one thing with another thing, or they try to predict forecast by forecasting, predicting the future. Those types of things are all done with data. Well, today what we're going to focus in on, and since this is Heart Health Month, I think it's really interesting to note that what we're going to do today is we're going to focus in on President Biden's health data. Now, a lot of people might say, Chris, this is really a problem. Well, what are you doing? You can't be doing this. Well, actually, President Biden's health data is a matter of public record. I received it. It was released by a media corporation, CNN. It was put on the internet, and it is freely accessible to anybody in this nation to take a look at our president's health. So before we start, I think we need to settle out on something here. First of all, this is not political. We're not going to talk about President Biden's health as if I were a member of his party or not a member of his party or somebody who just wanted to just bust on this guy. We're going to take a look at it from a very data-centric point of view. Now, in addition to that, I have heart disease. I've had heart disease for 30 years. So I'm going to take a look at some of these things and use my references as experience, as well as the things I've learned on this 30 years of having heart disease about different aspects about hyperlipidemia and some of the other things that occur on me that also occur in this 80-year-old body. So bottom line on this whole thing, and I think we'll come to it at the end, is the President Biden for an 80-year-old is in great shape. For an 80-year-old man who may be in retirement or maybe in a situation where he's not under continual daily stress. But I am not a doctor, and let me point that out very, very clearly. As a matter of fact, I'm going to point that out so clearly. I'm going to put this thing: I am not a doctor. Period. I don't have any. The things I know about health are the things that I've learned. So I don't have any medical experience, but I do have 30 years experience with a disease that is the number one killer, not just of women, as it's brought out almost every single day on the media stuff. It's the number one killer of everyone in the United States. The number one killer of people in the United States. Number one, and it's been number one for decades. Now, number two is cancer. So it's interesting how all of a sudden, cancer is catching up, unfortunately. But heart disease has been that number one killer for decades, decades. So I think we have to sit back and say, why is that? And, is it getting any better? And I'm going to tell you right now, having lived through 30 years of heart disease, that the treatments and the drug therapies and just basic diet, everything else is becoming better and better and better and better for people with heart disease like myself. So, um, some background. You probably already understand this. U.S. presidents are afforded physicals like any other citizen. We should have a yearly physical. He gets one, and he's had one for 46 years now on the government, right? Because he was a senator, and then he became senator, and then boom, vice president and president. This guy has never, let's make this very clear here. This guy's really never worked out of government. Now you can sit back and you can say, oh, well, he has this private thing here, whatever. He was always a member of the government, even after being the vice president. You get government health benefits, government insurance, government coverage, and as the ex-vice president, you get government medical forever. This is the deal. Especially as a senator or somebody like that. As a matter of fact, and I don't know if this is true, but even after, I think, one term, I think you get a retirement for life if you're a senator. So just let you know that. Because of their position, they must be fit to serve. That's why they're given a yearly physical. There's a specific constitutional provision if they are not. You've heard it in all the movies. All of a sudden, the president, I think it was a movie Air Force One, the president is taken hostage. He's not fit. He doesn't have the ability to do that. The vice president must take over. Okay, we have to go to the 20. I think it's the 25th Amendment. The cabinet has to sign off, and then basically the president is no longer the president. But that can happen with anything. Woodrow Wilson had a stroke while in office. But it basically kind of held it a secret. In fact, the first lady was doing a lot of the work behind the scenes. Another story. The recent physical to President Biden has some interesting aspects. We'll talk about those one at a time. Since this is Heart Health Month, we'll focus on the heart issues, but we'll also discuss some other issues that have to do with physical well-being. Specifically, we're going to focus on the hyperlipidemia, which is high cholesterol, as well as what they call atrial fibrillation, or AFib. Both of these maladies can cause a stroke or death, or at least a trip to the cardiac catheterization lab for a stent, or maybe even a bypass if the stent is not in if the blockage of the arteries isn't in a place where the cardiac catheterization, the wire, so to speak, can get in there and do whatever they need to do. Experience. This is from me experience. I challenge any doctor who's watching this. If you have 30 years or more of having heart disease, please let me know. And by the way, if you started all this at the age of 35, you let me know too. That I'd be more than happy to talk about that. I'm not talking medical doctor, not some PhD that whatever. I'm talking about medical doctors that actually treat patients from the standpoint of cardio, and specifically cardiologists. I'll throw that out there. Hey, cardiologists, you've had 30 years of heart disease. Let me know. I'll be more than happy to say, okay, you can have your say. Start at the age of 35, non-specific pain. I have this whole thing written in a book. It's called Wholeheartedly. It's on lulu.com. If you want to read it, it's both my wife's and my experience in this nightmare that was the beginning of this whole situation. And you got to remember, this was 1980s when all this happened. So, I mean, even statins were just kind of like kind of a fictional toy out there to be had. I mean, so that's an issue. First trip to cardiac cath lab, December 1989. It was in a German hospital. Everyone around me was speaking German. I was on a table. It was a metal table. It was cold. They had the cardiac cath lab. They inserted the catheter, the whole 9 yards. Later transferred to Walter Reed, the old Walter Reed, for an angioplasty after reblockage from the original one in the German hospital. 6 months later, I was back in Walter Reed for what they call an atherectomy. If you've never heard of it, it was a procedure. I don't know if it's still being done. Probably not. It basically was like a Roto-Rooter. Instead of an angioplasty using a balloon, basically you use compressed air to rotate a set of blades, and that blade would basically it would shave that plaque right off that artery. First stint came 10 years later, followed by a heart bypass at the age of 45. I've been taking a statin now for over 25 years, and blood pressure medication longer than that. I've been on aspirin, not the 81 milligram, 325 milligram. I've been on that for 30 years. So let's talk about facts and opinions real quick. Sorry, cold. Had nothing to do with the heart. So fact, it is reported that heart disease is the number one killer of women in the U.S. Fact, it is the number one killer of all causes of death in the United States. Opinion, mine. It will be a while before it loses that number one spot and has retained it for decades. I mean, that's a fact. It's retained it for decades. I think it's going to be a while before it loses that number one spot. There are many methods and strategies to combat heart disease. That's a fact. And put that down, but basically there are many. You can ask your cardiologist. There's a lot of them, a lot of different ones. Opinion. Many have their theories and cures, but it comes down to one thing: the individual, right? You can say, you take soy, drink more water, which I do anyways, but take niacin, do this. It's all kind of different things that are fly out there. And the best thing to do is talk about that with your cardiologist. We'll talk about that type of area later on with the Lead with Love show about partnering with your doctor. All this has to. I'm trying to put all of this into the to the last week, basically, of last full week of the Heart Health Month. There are people that are obese that have cholesterol numbers, great cholesterol numbers, and marathon runners that die of heart attacks. And some people sit there and say, "Why is that? Why? You know what? It's the situation. You know, some people, oh, it's genetics." Folks, let me tell you something. This genetics thing goes on and on and on and on. And I'm going to tell you, in my opinion, genetics thing is way over publicized. You know, you can sit down, you can tell somebody they have genetics out the wazoo, but the bottom line is healthy is healthy, not healthy is not healthy. And it's just the way it is. If you sit there, oh, I've smoked my whole life and I never had cancer. You know, there are exceptions to the rules. I'm going to tell you. But that doesn't mean that everyone in that family is going to be immune from any type of cancer. So there's a problem there, and I think people sometimes go to that way too quick. But again, my opinion. Um, what is good for one is not necessarily good for another, and that's again facts and opinions. I want to throw those out there just from that standpoint. I have some references in the back, and I'll show them to you. I've taken all the president's physical data from his released physical examination. Provide CNN. Here is the link. Mark it down, copy it, don't care because it was out there anyways, right? It's out in a document cloud of all things. This was just a summary, but it has some interesting data, and we'll talk about that data as time goes on. I'm not a medical doctor, but I've had decades of experience studying heart disease, studies, different aspects. I mean, it's an amazing thing that medicine has done in the past 40 years. It's just unbelievably amazing. And as a matter of fact, interestingly enough, I've had the bypass now for 20 years, over 20 years. And if I would have, if the bypass would, if the same situation wouldn't have happened like 10 years, 5 years later, uh, I would not have had to have the bypass. So it's that type of situation that just changes the dynamics of what the doctor is going to recommend based on current medical methodology and ethics, right? So I also understand the data behind cholesterol numbers. So we're going to share that. Okay. So let's take a look at the President Biden again. First look, statin, right? So he has taken what they call Crestor. You can look it up, Crestor. The statins are used to control or reduce what they call bad cholesterol normally, what they call low density lipoproteins or LDL, which is considered to be a major source of clotting and plaque and all the things that are bad, bad with blood. A lot of people ask that. They say, "Well, has LDL always existed?" I don't know. I don't know what the prehistoric man or woman looked like. But the bottom line is that somewhere along the line, when you're out there and you have a saber-toothed tiger bite off your arm, your adrenaline starts pumping. You got to have something to clot that blood so you don't bleed out. And the bottom line is that if your adrenaline is pumping, you got stress induced type constriction, and that helps do that. And I think LDL is part of that. But that's just, again, my opinion. I'm not a medical doctor. My PhD is what this is just based on reading and stuff. In President Biden case, the Crestor that he is taking is doing very well for him. I mean, his cholesterol numbers are fantastic. His lipid panel shows his total cholesterol 115. I mean, wow. I think the best I ever had in 30 years I had it was, I think I had maybe 120, something like that. Triglycerides 87, good. I mean, those are actually good numbers. 87 is fine. I mean, it was probably fasting. If it wasn't fasting, it's really good. High density lipoprotein, what they call good cholesterol, is 46. That should actually be a little higher. The guy's working out, which is good from what the physical says. So he's been working out, so that helps to raise that good cholesterol. There are other ways to raise it. I mean, but basically it's, plant protein, the type of thing will help, I guess, based on study, but I'm just not sure. The LDL, 58, that is fantastic. I was told once by my internal medicine doc back in Baltimore, Maryland, who had a fellowship in cardiology, that anything below 70 was fantastic. 58 is really good. So, what does this mean? And let's talk about this. The total cholesterol is a product of the low and high lipoproteins as well as the triglycerides divided by 5. Just the triglycerides divided by 5. In other words, if you add the LDL and HDL along with parentheses triglycerides divided by 5, you will get the total cholesterol. Well, when I did that, I added the 46 and 58 LDL and HDL, I got 104. If I add 87.5, 87 over 5, 87 what's triglycerides, or 17.4, I get 100, I get 121.4. Well, that's not 115. So I'm assuming that one, when they put this thing out, they didn't check their math. That's number one. Or it could mean another sort of LDL, but if they did, that's out of formulary. I just I I would hope that somebody goes back and corrects that record somewhere along the line. 115 is good. 121 is also very good. There's nothing wrong with 121. But, you know, the 115 is basically not the correct number, total cholesterol for Mr. Biden. They need to correct that. So this is different from the total cholesterol prevented, which would still be well within the range. But it does concern me. The math is wrong, right? Is this a miscalculation from the president's medical staff? This is concerning to me. If the president's medical staff, I mean, they come on, you got a calculator, or I'm sure the thing. And the thing that scares me is, what if this is computerized and the computer made a mistake? Now all of a sudden, what does that all mean? This whole thing was like, whoa. So I urge my viewers, somebody to or maybe I'll do it. Just go out to the president's. I'll go out to the president's LinkedIn and just say, "Hey, your total cholesterol is wrong. Somebody needs to check that, Mr. President." Maybe I'll just do that. Um, so, what about the drug Crestor? You can find out more about that here at this link, and it'll tell you about its side effects. Um, so, interesting supplemental information, and the side effects are real. I mean, muscle aches, muscle pains. I'm taking a statin. I'm telling you, you do get muscle aches and muscle pains. That's the way it is. You just kind of work through it, and I'm sure Mr. Biden's doing the same thing. I very rarely hear him complain about anything having to do with physical. So, interesting supplemental information. President got COVID and was treated with Paxlovid, which is normally prescribed. However, it is not to be taken with a statin. Paxlovid should not be taken with a statin. Crestor is a statin. So, how do I know? Well, first I got COVID and I couldn't take Paxlovid without first stopping my statin. I opted for another COVID drug, which was pretty useless. I can't remember what it was called, but it was like I might as well have been taking a placebo. Second, check out the site on the last slide concerning the interaction of Crestor with other drugs. You'll see statins are that's not to be in. So basically, Mr. Biden would have had to stop his statin, which his doctors probably recommended, but he would have had to stop his statin the entire time he was on Paxlovid. So I don't know whether that's 5 days or 7 days or how many days that regimen was. So for 5-7 days, he was basically off that statin. So if they did not recommend that, he had a higher risk of heart and blood issues, according to the Crestor site. So, including blood clots. Now, speaking of blood clots, the second part of the physical actually occurring before the hyperlipidemia, but again, vascular related, was talk about AFib. So, atrial fibrillation, heart issue, it doesn't have to do with the arteries of the heart. It has to do with the electrical function of the heart. And basically, what happens is it kind of offbeats. It beats a lot. You kind of feel it pounding out of your chest type thing. Whatever, it's heart racing, that type of thing. The president has persistent AFib. Now, persistent AFib, look this up from Mayo Clinic. Persistent AFib basically means that it cannot go back to normal by itself. It has to have some type of therapy, drug therapy, surgery, some procedure called ablation, I think, whatever it is, to make sure that comes back on its own. In some cases, and I don't know whether this is true or not, but in arrhythmias, heart arrhythmias like that, sometimes they need to shock it and bring it back in. He had so the pulse of 69, which he had in there. That's actually a really good pulse. I mean, relatively normal pulse. I mean, that's actually a good pulse. Pulses in AFib can run into the 120 mark, instantaneously almost, which can really feel interesting. Someone in my immediate family has AFib, and that's, it can be very scary. He has an ejection fraction on his left side of 55 to 60%. Now, some people might say, oh my God, he only has 55, 60% of his heart function. The guy is, no, it's not like that at all. You have to look that up and figure out, but I'm going to tell you, I've had that type of test. I had an ejection fraction within that range. It's a perfectly good range. I'm a runner, and they said that's the reason why it's good. You're actually really your heart is very, very efficient, as is Mr. Biden's. He is taking Eliquis as part of his treatment for AFib. So interesting enough, isn't Eliquis a blood thinner? Yes, it is, and so that means that the president always has a risk of excessive bleeding from just a scratch. If something were to happen, if he were to fall down, if he were to have, hit his knee, if he were to do anything, you can have internal bleeding at that point in time. In other words, for an 80-year-old, the president is doing well on the thinner, but increases the risk for more serious conditions. What about interactions between Eliquis and Crestor? I looked at the research. I didn't see anything between those two, which would make sense because a lot of people that have AFib, they may also be on some kind of um, statin. So what about his gait? Well, according to the physical, the stiffening gait is caused by degenerative, which they refer to as wear and tear, osteoarthritic changes of his spine. All right. This is called spondylosis. Um, it's a condition that can be painful, but it's degenerative. He's 80 years old, folks. We all go through degenerative bones. If we degenerate in the bone fracture, that's just the way it's going to go. In most cases, treated without surgery. Surgery is rare, according to the report. According to the Cleveland Clinic, normal therapy is physical therapy. The president, according to the report, is undergoing physical therapy. Because of medications, I'm not sure if the doctors are allowing him to take aspirin or ibuprofen, but that can also help. But he's got to be careful because he's on Eliquis, which is, you can't take an NSAID when you already have a blood thinner. It could be a problem. Physical notes: the president also has post-fracture arthritis from his foot fracture, which occurred in November 2020 from walking his dog. Dog flew out from under him, his feet slipped, whatever. Because of these issues, the gait is considered to be bone related, not as a result of cognitive aspects. General health: the president, besides the issues with spine and foot bones, does have what is called mild sensory neuropathy of the feet. Now, this entails nerves of the feet not getting full feeling, right? And instead, there's a numbness or weakness in those areas. I looked it up, basically there. Um, it might also indicate diabetes, which the president does not have according to tests. The physical also ruled out alcoholism, B12, or thyroid disease. On the first one, they said the president does not consume alcohol. On the other two, they had tests. There was a lesion from the president's chest removed and tested. The doctor's still waiting the result. That's part of everybody. They do all that stuff. They hit it with air. Oh my gosh, that really hurts. I mean, but basically it's for people. I mean, as you get older, you get, whether somebody called them barnacles. That's what we get. President's history. President Kennedy had bad back issues that were so severe that he at times couldn't even get up from a chair. They had to have help. President Franklin Roosevelt had polio. President Bill Clinton had heart disease, which was undiagnosed, later produced a heart attack and a bypass. And it was funny because President Bill Clinton's personal physician was Dr. Dean Ornish. Remember the Ornish diet and reversing heart disease, Dr. Dean Ornish, the book and all that stuff. I don't know what Dr. Ornish felt about this whole thing, but finally, when he had the heart attack and the bypass, President Clinton called him and asked him for his advice. I don't know what Dean Ornish would have said. I think it would have said, "Well, it's about time, Bill." So anyways, he went on the Ornish diet, and he said hasn't had any problems since. President Woodrow Wilson had a stroke while in office. There were probably many other presidents. I don't know. I didn't go back as far as, just to see if George Washington had any problems. I mean, he had wooden teeth, so bad bone structure. Had any other U.S. presidents had maladies, either in office or shortly thereafter, that were not symptomatic during their presidency, right? If the physician in charge of the president feels that the president is medically fit to serve, physically fit to serve, even with these medical issues that are mitigated, then the data certainly supports that claim, in my humble and non-medical opinion. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean, it means this, that The president is 80 years old. He has served 40 some years in government. Um, he's not had any physical ailments other than the ones that are listed there. He works out. He was a football player. He has some good basic physical background. I think that at 80 years old, he'll do well. Um, eh, for now, if any of these issues go symptomatic, um, it will immediately affect him, and that's a thing that the doctors are just going to have to keep their eye on. So he's fit for service. Two vascular related problems, one with cholesterol, and one with electrical aspects of the heart. In both cases, medications keeping both of these at bay. The gait, which some have called cognitive related, is caused by bone issues from arthritis as well as degenerative spinal symptoms. Now, there were no indication in that entire report when I read that they gave him any cognitive tests. So the only thing we can go on is the physical test that they afforded the president. That's it. Um, as having heart disease for over 30 years, I do give credit to the president who at 80 is still looking fit. I mean, and I'll tell you something, if he does, in fact, have a heart issue that would normally diagnose as a bypass at the age of 80, maybe as the president, they would probably go ahead and do a bypass. But the age of 80, most doctors would not want to operate, except in an emergency, on an 80-year-old individual because the morbidity rate as a result of just the surgery is going to be higher than somebody who's 40. Or in my case, 45, they were probably not happy, but they were probably like, okay, this person, and I was in good physical shape, and that probably helped out a lot. So that's basically what we're talking about here. Here are the references that I used for this little show here, and you can go ahead and take it and take a look at it, and say, Chris, you're full of crap, and if you want to put that, hey, if you're going to put something down in a comment as a result of this video, and basically it's going to say, you're full of crap, please tell me why. I would really I'd like comments that mean something. I'd like comments that just, hey, look, this is what I think. And that's fine. This is all an opinion piece, folks. I tried to remain as much factual stuff as I could based on the report. But I think a lot of people think that President Biden is going to just pop off and say bye-bye tomorrow. And I don't think so. I think he's in pretty good physical shape. And I think those are the things we have to take a look at. I think, try to be as positive as possible. I'm not saying I like the policies, I like the guy, whatever else. I'm just saying physically, he seems to be in very, very good shape. And we should at least wish him well in that regard. And I think that he's keeping himself physically fit, which I think is good. So, I mean, for the long term, for his kids and his grandkids and everybody else that depends upon him and that love him. So you guys take care of yourselves. And remember, this is the Data Show. We deal with data, and we go out and we get it. We research it. We try to answer questions, and we try to figure out exactly what it is that is the question and what is the answer based on the data that we have. So until next time, this is Chris Greco saying, see you all from the Data Show. And whatever you do, always and always check the data.